All right, good evening, everyone. This is Bernie O'Rourke, the Youth Livestock Specialist, and tonight's the Beef Livestock webinar for new exhibitors. And so we're glad you all can make it. I know it's a little lighter group than we've had in the past because of the weather, but that's fine. We'll work through it. This will be recorded. So if you've got some club members and other friends of yours that would like to see this at some point, we will have it online shortly, probably in a week or so, and there'll be some information towards the end of the webinar that you can be able to access that. Okay, just a couple of things tonight before we get going. Those of you who are on the webinar, there is a chat box in the lower left. And if you want to throw in some questions in there as we're going, I will entertain questions that way. But then at the end of each speaker, we'll have a little time for them for you all to ask them questions. Okay, so we'll move through this pretty quick. We've got some great speakers tonight that they've got a lot to talk about in like 15 minutes. So we'll see how well they do. This is till 7:30, and we'll try our best to get in within that time. So I'm just going to go through a few things in the beginning, and then I'm going to let our first speaker move forward. We're going to skip the polling slides tonight. Just to give you an idea, with the first webinar, we showed this slide. You should be able to see this 2012 project numbers. That's the slide on for those of you that are at home and just have the PowerPoint in your hand. It's the 2000 project numbers. And what's kind of interesting to note here, horse is pretty high up there, probably one of the is the largest animal enrolled project. But if you see, swine is actually the third largest animal project. So that's kind of neat and interesting. We've been beating dairy now for about 3 years now. So that's kind of exciting for the meat animal project. So just to note, I get a lot of questions what the numbers look like here in Wisconsin, and that's what they look like so far. But granted, these are only 4-H numbers. They don't include like FFA and those and other groups that are involved in animals. Okay. Moving on, I'm used to hitting the arrow down, but not the arrow on the PowerPoint here. The next slide is just the Youth Livestock website. Many of you in your counties are dealing with a lot of things going on, and so this website is kind of helpful in that arena. You can, on the bottom, enter in your email address and hit subscribe and get information. And then you also, on the upper right, can access Facebook and social media and any of those things if that interests you. So just quickly to talk about the Beef Project, to kind of set the stage for our first speaker. The objective of the Animal Project is for one, the first bullet to talk about the steer, the market animal, is to produce a market animal that's high quality, has a good carcass, and you've raised it in a safe way that's economical. That you've either made some money, maybe lost a little money, and you learn some things along the way. Okay. In a breeding animal project, some of you might be in that. Certainly you want to provide and raise an animal that's high quality, but can also pass on those high quality traits when mated well to their offspring. And so that's another aspect of the Beef Project that we think is pretty exciting if you're in the breeding animal perspective. Okay. And when Ron Russell gets on and talks about selection, he'll talk a little bit about different traits to look for. Okay, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So I've got 4 speakers on besides myself this evening, and we're kind of doing it in a mishmash way because everybody's busy, so we're putting them on when they can be on with us. So I appreciate them being able to take time out of their day to give you a little knowledge about nutrition, and that's the first subject we're going to go into is
your line is now muted.
Our beef cattle nutrition, and I've asked Searls. He's with Vita Plus. His background is in beef cattle, but his family also does dairy and pigs. So a lot of good background here, and I'll hand it over to Jared.
Thank you, Bernie. Appreciate that. All right. Like Bernie said, at any time, if you guys got questions, please feel free to voice them in the chat box, and we'll try to get everybody's questions answered tonight. Bernie, how do I move the next slide?
Right there. Right up there. You just hit those here. Sorry. There you go.
All right.
Tell them what slide.
Okay. The slide that I'm on now is the one that top says feeds. We'll just go through this. Oats are main ingredient in a lot of show feed diets. They're high in protein, good in fiber. They keep the cattle growing without putting on a lot of condition, which is extremely important for the fact that we have county fairs from June all the way into September. So these animals have to be managed differently. If your county fair is like Lafayette, a county where it's in June, you're going to have to push these animals a little bit faster. If your county fair is Iowa County, which is the county to the north of that, you don't show until 120 days later. So those animals have to be managed differently. So we use oats a lot in the show diets for the one fact that they provide good energy without it getting animals over conditioned. So we're growing framed to be able to put on to finish that animal out in the end. Corn is the second most highly used ingredient in our show diets, and it depends whether it's rolled corn, cracked corn, or steam flake. Steam flake corn will provide more energy than rolled or cracked. I prefer to use whole corn myself just for the consistency. A lot of the times in our diets when we see cracked corn in Wisconsin, majority of our feed mills or feed manufacturers are either producing feed for the dairy or the swine industry, and that corn gets too finely processed, and we can see some acidosis issues. We can see some lameness issues with that. The one nice thing about whole corn is that it's consistent every time. It's the same. Plus, there's just a little bit of fiber with that whole corn that also helps the rumen be able to break it down and at a slower process so that we're not putting a whole bunch of starch into that animal in one big slug. Protein supplements. We have many choices here. Soybean meal, cottonseed meal, or many of the feed companies also recommend a protein pellet. Usually see a 32 to 38% protein. It can be all natural. There can be also a little bit of urea. One of the main misnomers in the show industry is that urea burns off hair, so a lot of people believe that. There has been no research to prove that. It's just one of those show fables, which once you're around it, you'll find a lot of those show fables. Another protein source that we've seen pop up in the last couple of years is canola meal. Canola comes mainly from Canada with the utilization of canola oil in McDonald's for their French fries. We have seen a ton of canola coming into the United States, and it is priced really competitive against soybean meal. So it's another one that if you're talking to feed manufacturer for protein supplement, you might run into canola meal as a choice. Next is the minerals. They fill a void that the animal can't synthesize themselves. There's plenty of feed manufacturing companies that you can deal with. I'm going to promote nobody. It doesn't matter. Land O'Lakes, there is no Land O'Lakes anymore. Frena, Cargill, Showright, Vita Plus, ADM, Kent, they all make a top quality feed. Everybody has science and research behind it. So whoever is closest to you, whoever you can get feed manufactured for fresh and it's not sitting around in stale, it doesn't really matter. Whoever you work with, it'll be a quality product. Feed additives, they're all used to provide cattle with supplements and protect them from setbacks due to stress. There is a variety of feed additives. Most of them don't have any research behind them. A lot of them are for hair growth. Some of them are for some muscle growth too. There's a wide variety. I would do some research on them yourselves with the internet. You can pretty much Google anything and find the information you need. Just do a little research before you spend a lot of money on feed additives. They are very expensive, and with only feeding 1 to possibly 4 animals, we don't have a really good comparison to know whether it worked or not. So it's something that you can kind of be suckered into. We all want to, find that product that's going to push us over the edge and help us out. A lot of times that product is just hard work. This is the water slide we're on next. Always provide cool, fresh, clean drinking water. This is the most important nutrient. We can't mess this one up. whether it's this winter where it's been cold, we're trying to keep waters thawed so that the animals can drink, or if we're talking the summer months where it's hot and their water requirement goes up. The main thing with this one is fresh water. A lot of times you'll see some water that gets put in tanks and it gets a little stale. Make sure that we're always providing good, clean, fresh drinking water. You can't go wrong on this one. Also, never withhold water from your projects. There's other ways to do that sort of a thing, but water is an extremely important nutrient. Muscle is made up of over 70% water, and that's what we're looking for in these animals is muscle development and fill. And it's a no-brainer that you always want to provide good fresh water. Although I will admit that this past few months it has been very difficult to do that. And also, with the past few months, some of that water coming out is extremely cold. It's about 33 degrees. You will notice that the consumption has probably dropped down. The other thing with that being said, this winter, the last couple of weeks, we've probably seen consumption go back up. Our temperatures are getting a tick more moderate. So I'm sure we've all dealt with that in the past of we've been feeding our animals quite a bit this winter, and I don't really know if we've been putting on a lot of game. But it certainly has been very trying, that's for sure. Just some basics here on the next slide. What your show feed should be between a 10 to 13% protein. Fat you're going to want between 2 and 5 so the calf can utilize it the best. You'll see some of those show diets get a little bit higher on that fat issue. Most of that's just added cost. It's not going to really benefit you. Remember, when you're looking at a feed tag is on an as-fed basis, not dry matter. When I said 10 to 13, that's on a dry matter basis. So if you're seeing a show feed that's 10% and it's 85% dry matter, your actual protein level is going to be about that 75 to 12% protein. So just a lot of times we overfeed protein. Protein is the most expensive component per price a pound in these diets. So just make sure we're not getting it too high. In our heifer diets, we're going to want to have that protein in that probably 13 to 14% range because we're going to want to provide as much skeleton and growth as we can in those animals. In our show diets with our steers, the lower the protein, we're going to impact finish more than we put on frame. Some of your Semitol genetics, some of that stuff can get pretty framey. We might want to stunt that frame and not let it to get it as it reach its genetic potential, because then we're talking somewhere up to 1,450, 1,500 pound carcasses to try to finish out, and that really isn't ideal for the show industry. Although on the commercial side of things, there's nothing wrong with having those side of big carcass animals on the show industry. It just isn't quite as accepted yet. Daily feeding should be broken down into at least 2 feedings, 50% in the morning, 50% in the evening. Try to do this as consistently as you can. I know we all got different projects going on, different activities going on. So sometimes these feeds get kind of stretched out a little bit longer. It's really easy to push some of these cattle off feed by feeding a couple 2-3 hours later. A lot of these animals are very finicky to begin with by genetic, and you want to make sure that you can try to be as consistent as possible. Another thing that I've run into is a lot of times people say, put the grain down, let the animal eat. Whatever it doesn't eat in 30 minutes, take away from it, give it to the next feeding. If you figure that out, that animal only gets to eat 1 hour out of 24. You're kind of training that animal to not be able to be a good eater and converter. We want to be able to have a safe, nutritious diet that we can feel free to that animal can consume at several times throughout the day. They can snack eat. They can eat when they feel like it. We're not going to just slug feed them. Slug feeding also creates an environment in the rumen where we're killing a lot of the microbes off that we need to digest not only the starch but also the forage. So try to make it a situation where you can give that animal plenty of time to eat, not just when it's convenient for you to stand there and make sure everything's going on. I've had a good friend of mine in the past was like, well, what happens if I'm not there and the animal chokes? We don't do the Heimlich to these animals. Even if you're standing there, there's not a whole lot you can do. Animals have been eating on their own for a long time. They will not choke. Another example, 10 to 12 hours apart, 7 a.m., 6, 7 o'clock in the morning before you go to school, when you come home, 5 o'clock, just an example of feeding times that can work. Also, if you cannot do it yourself, contact your parents. Try to help with, split it up. Maybe they can do it more consistently. One feeding, you can do it more consistently the next one. The last one's very important. As your calf grows, it's going to increase feed. Make sure that you do not increase it more than 1 pound every 3 days to prevent digestive problems from occurring. If you see that animals finish enough feed a little quicker, it's become a little more aggressive when you come to feed it, increase it a pound, sit there for 3 to 5 days, let it adjust to that, and then if it's still aggressive, increase it by another pound. Going at increments higher than that, we can actually shoot past what the animal actually, and we can get into what we call a roller coaster. They're eating a lot one day, next day they don't hardly eat the feed, and then we just go up and down. We want to try to prevent that and keep that animal on a steady nutrition plan the whole way through. So here's a difficult one to master, is it's very important to have the right size calf. Most of these calves are born from March to April. Our county fair season, like I said before, runs from June to September. So the calves need to be managed differently for different fairs. Also, the genetics that we're running into, we have a lot of differences in frame scores. So we want to make sure that animal looks 12 o'clock on that day of the show. So pick an animal that you can feed for that show. Try not to have to hold it a lot or have to push it a lot. It just causes a lot of extra stress on the project. And these projects are very fun and very rewarding, but they can also be a little difficult when we're really pushing hard to make sure that a steer is going to be big enough for the sale. That happens a lot of times. Granted, coming out of the winter that we just have, I imagine our gains are going to be a lot less than desired. So we're going to have to maybe push these animals a little bit sooner than we thought, just because of all the energy we took just for maintenance this winter. None of it really got utilized for growth or for gain. So this is an art. There's no cookie cutter way that we can do this. It's not, this is the program, we got to do it. Each animal is going to eat a little differently. Each animal is going to convert differently. So it just takes some time to get to know, the genetics that you have, the different breeds that you have, and how to do that. By all means, I hope there's good leaders in your club and in your county that you can lean on. People are very open to helping you out. Very few people are actually open enough to go and be open about it. If you ask them, they'll be more than happy to tell you, but very few people are going to come out and say, hey, let me give you a hand with that. It's just not the way that it works. There's a wealth of information out there. You just got to go seek it. Do not be afraid to ask people questions. The last slide I want to talk about a little bit here was heifers need to be fed a higher protein diet, like I said in the past. 13 to 14% crude protein to try to maximize those frames in those animals. Also, high fiber diets. Soy hulls are good feed for our show heifers. A lot of hay. We don't want to get them too fat. The show industry will tend to have a little fatter than we normally want in the commercial industry. But if we feed them in an area where they don't get a lot of exercise, that we're going to see animals that are just over conditioned, and it's not going to look good in the show ring or back home when we try to put them in our cow herds. So rarely do we need to push these heifers to get them to look too chubby. A lot of these heifers, are going to be around for a long time. So we're just trying to feed them a high fiber diet, a lot of hay, some haylage, a little bit of silage can also work really nice to develop a big barrel and rumen in those heifers too. So we would feed them a lot differently than we do our steers. So ask plenty of questions.
Your line is now unmuted.
If anybody has any questions, please feel free at this time.
Does anybody have any questions for Jared? Because he's going to be moving on to another event with his kids. So if you've got some nutrition questions, this would be a great time to have a nutritionist on board to help you answer those. Any questions on, like, anything you might have, throw them out.
One other point that Bernie mentioned before is we do have some resources on this through the extension is the use of Optiflex, which is a beta antagonist in our show steers. It is a feed that we feed the last 28 to 42 days. It increases muscle shape and takes away a little bit of the fat off the animal and increases the live carcass weight by at least 30 pounds, adds about an inch of ribeye in the last 30 days. It's a product that really can be utilized to a lot of success in the show ring, but it's one that has to be managed a little bit so that you have them a little bit on the chubbier side before you use it, so you get that right feel to the animal when the judge puts his hands on it. We had that resource through the UW extension that talks about the use of the beta antagonist.
Yeah, Jerry makes a great point. A few years ago, we did another webinar like this on some of those feed additives, so Optiflex and Taline and those types of things that are great to build muscle, but sometimes we don't, managing it is a little challenging for some, and perhaps you might not have the right animal for it either. So we talked about that. So if you're interested in that, don't hesitate to email me back, and I can get you to that link on the website where some of that information is for you. Any other questions for Jared? Everybody still out there? Okay. Well, if not, I appreciate it, Jared. Thank you for helping us out, and have a safe travel home, I guess, huh?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jared. We're going to move on then. Hopefully, Casey, are you on?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we can hear you. Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Jared. So Casey Jentz, I've asked to talk about much of like the halter braking, the handling type of the project or the end of the project. Casey's had a long history in the beef business. He works with his family on the Lone Wolf Farms, and also now is the manager of Markhart Cattle or Landing Cattle that's in Barneveld, Wisconsin here. So has a piece of experience to share. I know he's kind of fighting a bit of a cold tonight. I appreciate him being on tonight. And I'll lead it off, Casey, for you. I'll pass it over. The first slide I have up, if you're not online, is the halter trading or halter braking slide. So.
Okay. Yeah, actually I am online, and thanks for putting in the pictures. It spices my slides up a little bit. Anyway, like you said,
your line is now muted. Your line is now unmuted.
Showing different things like that. I guess the first thing that I'll put out there is all these things can be done a lot of different ways. I'm sure a lot of people have their own way of halter braking. It may not be the way I learned to do it or the way I've seen it done, but that doesn't mean that it can't work for you. Any of the stuff I might tell you today is just, kind of how we do it. It doesn't mean that if you don't do it that way, it's wrong. So getting into the halter braking slide, I guess the first thing when it comes to halter braking is safety. We always want to keep safety in mind. You're putting an animal in an adverse situation that they really haven't experienced before. So they could react to the multiple in different ways. And, the biggest thing you always want to be thinking about it is a safe way to try to accomplish what you're going about doing. I guess the type of halter, the next slide, type of halter, there's a bunch of different types of halters. Bernie, they kind of told me to make sure it was pretty basic. So we're going to go through all the basics, even from your type of halter. Obviously, there's show halters that are leather and have a metal chain. That's not what we want to be using when it comes to halter braking. A nice nylon rope type halter usually works good. A brand new one is not so good. They tend to slide a lot. A lot of times they'll slide too far down on their nose when they're pulling. If you can have a halter that's, somewhat broken and kind of used, that usually helps quite a bit. I guess other than the type of halter, the next deal is the animal's age. We've broke calves all the way from a month old all the way to 2 years old. I would much prefer to do it when they're a lot closer to the 1 month old. A lot of beef calves are weaned off in that 4, 5, 6 month range, and that's usually the time when you can halter break them. If you can do it sooner than that, if you have the ability to do it sooner than that, I know a lot of people on here probably purchase their cow or purchase their steer or heifer. So you maybe won't pick them out until they're 6 months old, but if you're raising your own in a breeding stock type setting, really the earlier you can start, the better off. As the animals get bigger, they get a little more difficult to handle, and it just makes for a little bit more difficult situation. Tying them up for the first time, I guess at our place, like you said, we try to do it earlier than later if we have the chance. If we still have a cow-calf pair at home, a lot of times we'll bring the calf in during the day and tie it up, and then bring the cows up to the barn and let them milk at night, and then try to pull that calf back in. It usually seems to be probably the lowest stress way to do it. As far as just after they're weaned and halter breaking them is maybe a little bit more stressful. They're also quite a bit smaller if you can break them on the cow before they grow to be that 500, 600, 700 pounds, where they get a little bit more difficult. If that's not an option, which for a lot of ours it's not either, we'll tie them up after we've weaned them. We usually don't like to do it all in one shot when we wean them, give shots, that type of thing. We usually like to break that up so there's not just one huge stress event on the animal. We'll give some vaccines and shots, and then a week or two later we'll wean them, and then we'll usually give them a week or two to adjust before we worry about trying to stress them out again by halter breaking them. I guess tying them up for the first time, I guess the biggest thing, this is where you really want to watch the safety part of it. We usually run ours into a head chute and lock them in like you would normally do vaccines and stuff, and then put the halter on them and get that halter adjusted nice so it's about halfway between their eyes and their nose, kind of on the bridge of their nose there. Because as they pull, that's going to creep down a little bit. You want to make sure you keep it a little more closer to the eyes because it's going to pull down as they pull on the halter. I guess other things, we usually put it on there and then let them out of the chute, and we kind of run them over into a pin where we usually tie them up. Where we tie them, I guess whatever you have for a situation is what you have to work with. If you can find somewhere, a gate or a wall where you can tie to where if they jump, they can't get their legs through the front of the gate, that's probably the most ideal type situation. If you can do that, a lot of times they'll pull and they'll jump forward. And if they can get their legs through a gate, sometimes you'll have just try to avoid bad situations altogether with one getting their leg caught or anything like that. Once we run them over there, we usually don't, sometimes I'll pull them over there if they're small enough, but most of the time we'll kind of run them over there, and then I'll use like a show stick to pick up the end of the halter and try to wrap it around the gate that we tie them to. When we tie them, we usually like to wrap the halter around like the board or board in the gate or the post, whatever you're tying to, 1 or 2 times, and then tie it, either up a board or kind of to a different post. And that usually takes when they pull, it takes all the stress from being right on the knot and pulling your knot super tight so you can't get it open. When you're ready to lead them, it usually prevents that. A lot of times if you just tie them like you normally would in the summer and just like tie to a hook and just make one knot, they'll pull it so hard that it's really, really hard to get out. So, I mean, that's, I don't know, hopefully a little helpful tip. Once we tie them there, we usually do it in the afternoon and kind of let them pull all night long, if we can. We don't want to leave any water buckets or feed buckets or anything in front of them because a lot of times they tend to jump a lot. They'll be pulling all over the place. So if you can kind of eliminate those type of things, we usually feed a lot of dry hay. They probably aren't going to eat very much of it, but if they'll calm down enough to where they start eating, that's kind of a comfort food for them. The other thing we'll do is we'll take a curry comb and try to brush on them. We usually like to start around the tail head or the hind end. I know for beginners that might seem a little bit more scary just because, you got to be careful that you don't get kicked. But as far as the animal is concerned, starting from that end, you'll be a lot better off. They tend to be a lot more nervous when you're around their head or their shoulders. So if you can kind of start from the back and itch them around their tail head and kind of curry their legs off and then work your way forward as the animal feels more comfortable with you, that usually works best. And then as far as leading them for the first time, we usually let them pull for, a half a day or most of the night, and then the next morning we'll try to lead them to the water. Most of the time it's a pull and see what kind of happens, but we have it all gated so they can't get out and run in a lot. We use it in the barn. I would definitely suggest trying to stay inside as much as you can for the first couple days until the animal is more comfortable with leading before you try going outside and do a big lot. Those are just, I guess a couple of the things that we do. If they're pulling or they're running away, that's not a huge deal. That'll go away with time as they learn to follow you. If they're trying to come after you, I guess that's when we throw a little red flag up. It's not safe at all. We'll probably just try to give them some more time and itch on them and try to make them more comfortable with us. But a lot of times those are the ones that take a lot more work, and you probably want to have somebody that knows what they're doing a little more to help you out because they put you in a really adverse situation as far as safety is concerned. So I guess moving on to the next slide, I'll let Bernie do that. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in there, and I can get to those as soon as I see them. I am following along here online too. She asked me to talk a little bit about fitting. The fitting part of it is, it's hard to explain over a webinar. So I just kind of went over a couple of the oversights, some of the equipment that we use as far as fitting is concerned. A chute for safety. If your animal, it's not necessary. I know it's a big expense for a lot of beginners. And sometimes it's something that you need to work up to. But combs, clippers, different clipper blades, and different adhesives and hairsprays are all kind of different things that we use to fit. A blower is probably our main equipment between that and the clippers. I know a blower is a little bit expensive. They're getting up into almost $400 range now. But if you have a 4-H leader that can direct you to somebody where you can maybe borrow one or buy a used one for a little less than that, that would definitely be a worthwhile purchase, especially if you're going to be involved in the show cattle beef industry for more than a year or two. Clippers, there's lots of different types of clippers. They've made a lot nicer clippers here lately, smaller ones that are a lot easier for people to learn with, that have multiple blades that attach to them that are, the blades have really come a long way. They really help a beginner person learn how to clip as far as blending and doing a nice job. Some of the different types of blades are mediums. The super sharp blades like an X-Block or a super blocking type blade. Those type of blades are mainly for the fitting areas. The medium blade is more of a blending blade that you like to use on the neck. You can also use it on the head. There's a couple other blades that work pretty well too. The best thing to do on that is just ask somebody, if you have a beef leader or whoever you know that does do that. I'm sorry, I just reading here on the chat site. So please, Bernie is answering some of my questions here as we go. So that's good as well. Clipping, as far as clipping is concerned, I mean, you'd probably be best to go to a clipping seminar or a fitting type clinic where they can teach you. Nowadays, almost the whole animal gets clipped. So there's different places where you want to be tighter and want the hair to blend better. It's probably something that's a little hard to explain over a webinar. What do I clip on a Holstein steer? On a Holstein steer, you would want to clip them the same as a beef steer. You're still going to try to highlight those areas that a beef steer is also trying to highlight, as far as where you're going to try to leave longer hair. You're not going to want to do a top line like a dairy type situation. You're going to want to level that back out and make it nice and wide, kind of fit their tail head up a little bit different than a traditional dairy type style. I know they're dairy steers, but you're definitely going to want to try to clip them more like a beef animal and fit them like a beef animal. Animal, I guess, on a Holstein steer, you're probably not going to be able to grow a lot of hair, but on a beef animal, some of them grow hair, some of them don't. To me, it doesn't really matter if your animal's pretty good. The judge is going to find it, whether it has hair or whether it doesn't. So as far as growing hair, it's a little nicer to cover up some of the bumps and indiscrepancies that your animal might have that you can try to cover up with hair. But as far as it being you have to have type of thing, I guess I don't really look at it that way at all. On the leg hair, if I can get it the longer, the better. Most of the animals we have don't grow a ton of leg hair. We breed mostly Angus type cattle, so we're not really breeding for hair. It's nice when you have some, but it's not a be all end all like I was saying before. So you can get back here. Areas to fit, the legs. Actually, the tail head is probably the most important. From my experience, that's the first thing that the judge is going to see when you walk in. He's going to get an overview of your animal, and a lot of times it's how straight they are across the top, how level they are, and that all comes together with the tailhead. So if I'm rushed, the first thing I'm going to do is a tailhead, and then I'm going to worry about the legs after that. As you get more into fitting, you'll fit the underline and the belly line, and all the legs and then the top. But for a beginner, if you can do a nice job on the tailhead and then pull up some of the leg hair, obviously, in my experience, the back legs are probably more important than the front legs. So if you can do a nice job on the back legs, I would probably start with that before I would worry about making sure the front legs are perfect. And then as far as timing, that's another thing. You're going to want to see how fast the judge is going and try to time it up so your animal has the least amount of time to stand and wait. Normally for us, it takes right around an hour. We usually figure to fit one animal. A lot of times we show a lot of animals, so if we can get a couple people to help us out, I usually lean on my friends who are there who hopefully don't have the same type of animals going in as what we do, and I can try to get them to help, and that seems to cut down a little bit on the timing and be able to get multiple ones done. Guess I better get the showing. I'm going to run a little short on time here. In the showing, animal prep, I guess I kind of went over that a little bit. On the fitting, that's a lot of the animal prep. The other animal prep would be making sure they're fed well, getting them filled up with water, try to just make them so they look their best. And the exhibitor prep, I guess, for the showing, Bernie, if you want to move to the showing slide for me, please. The exhibitor prep, I guess I'd like to see clean clothes, some type of a collared shirt, short sleeve, long sleeve, it doesn't really matter to me. Usually you have a show stick. I like to see a belt, a comb, a Scotch comb if you have it. If you have a plastic one, I would prefer those just because they're a little bit safer for the animal and safer for the kid. They sell a lot of them now, and I guess I like those in a show ring setting. That way, if they do fall out, somebody steps on them or an animal steps on them, kind of eliminates the risk of having it go into somebody's foot like you used to have with the metal combs. Then some type of boot. I prefer no hat. Some people wear a cowboy hat, I guess, if that's your thing, but probably definitely not a baseball type hat. So that's kind of exhibitor prep. And then the biggest thing in showing is practice. As many times as you can get out in the show ring, the better. For us, we usually practice at home. When we were showing a lot, it was usually every day or every other day. We would try to practice with our animals, walk them into their step and get them used to a show stick. We use different parts of the yard, different parts of, I'm sure my mom loved having cattle prints in the yard, but it was always something different to try to get the cattle used to going into a different situation, which all show rings are, just so they act calm and they kind of, act the way you would expect them to act. So I guess that's the biggest thing. Practice makes perfect. As many times as you can get in the ring, the better. Other than that, if anybody has any other questions, I can turn it back over to Bernie. If she's not muted.
Hello, yeah, it's me.
Okay.
Yeah, are you asking for more questions?
Yeah, if they had any questions, or otherwise, I think I'm probably pretty close to out of time.
Okay, great coverage on kind of three topics that are pretty hard to chat about when we're over a phone. If we were at a nice county fairgrounds, we could get a lot more done, right, Casey?
Yeah, a little hands-on where it always helps a little bit with the topics that I have, but you can learn stuff from talking to people too. So.
Yeah. So there's another question here. Could you walk in your barn with different objects to try and get the animal used to them?
I must have missed it. Oh, there it is. That's as far as walking into your barn with different objects, I don't, we don't usually do too much like that. We'll play a radio to get them used to different sounds, different things like that. I guess I have a whole bunch of nieces right now, so if they can't get used to little kids running around and screaming at our house, they really are gonna be all, I don't know, gonna have problems at the show. But yeah, I mean, it's not a bad idea to let them see different objects. I mean, I guess I don't know exactly what different objects you would want to try, but we tend to try to do some different things. The cattle do get used to a routine, so every once in a while we'll try to break up a routine. Like I said, when we were practicing, we'll go up in the yard, or we'll go to a different lot, or we'll walk out in the pasture to try to split up the routine a little bit and get them used to some different things. I think that's about all I have.
Okay.
If there's any other questions?
Noises. I think that would be good too. Yeah. Any more questions for Casey before we let him go and go to bed?
I doubt that. I'm going to watch the Olympics yet tonight after this is done.
Okay. Well, good. Any other questions for Casey while we've got him on before he hits the Olympics? All right. Okay. Well, we appreciate it, Casey, for you joining us. And if you've got any other questions, on any of these items, don't hesitate to email me. And of course, I can get them in contact with others, get you in contact with our speakers tonight, which either way works great. Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Ron Russell, are you on by chance? He was going to be our next speaker, but he was finishing up with class, and I might be a little early for him. So, Ron Russell, are you on by chance? He was going to be our next speaker, but he was finishing up with class, and I might be a little early for him. So we're just going to move forward. Ron Russell, if some of you might know him, he is our senior lecturer at UW-Madison, and his role is teaching our animal science students in livestock evaluation and meat evaluation. So he is a pretty key role here on campus for those types of things. So he was finishing up with the students, and so I think I'll do my part here while we're waiting for him to join us. So some of the things I would to visit with you about is about Ron Russell. Did you join us? Nope. Okay, that's the purchasing of or some things to think about when you're purchasing your animals. Some of these things are kind of the questions.
Your line is now muted.
These are some of the questions that I get quite a bit. It's more kind of the logistics and the background type of things. And so when you're looking to purchase or, some of you buy your animals, some of you raise. We know that that's different for everyone. But animals, make sure you get them from a known source and or maybe a recommendation from someone else, that sort of thing. I think it's pretty important to make sure you do that. And then and perhaps you can establish a relationship with them. The second thing is make sure you're asking about their vaccination programs and making sure that they are getting some shots and those types of things, and getting some boosters and knowing what perhaps they still need. All of those are good questions. Do you have any health concerns? Is it anything, that you should be worried about that, maybe they were recently sick and just getting better? Think about those things when you're buying. If you want to get a breed animal or a steer or a heifer that is a breed, like a Simmental or a Hereford or any of those types of things, make sure you get the registration paper or make sure you try and get that established when you're in the process. So when you do arrive at your county fair and you want to show it as a Simmental, you do have the paperwork. So sometimes that does take a little time, depending on the owner. Try and get, like we've talked about quite a bit tonight, is try and get the appropriate sized animal that works at your fair and kind of what end weight you want it to have. Also a good thing to ask is what's the person been feeding your animal and or your potential project animal, and try and get some ways or think of some ways of transitioning them perhaps into the diet that you're going to probably be using. So all those things are things to consider when you're thinking about buying an animal from a buyer. Some logistics. What is a general end weight? Well, that's a great question. I'm trying to watch the chat as I'm talking on my one-man show here. That's a great question. I think that answer is a hard one because it depends on the size of your animal. If it's a framey animal, it's going to get a little larger compared to an animal that might be a little more moderate. And I think Ron Russell joined us here not too long ago, and he'll get into that a bit more in the selection aspect. But usually, a good kind of Angus cross or a semi-cross or something like that, depending upon their frame, is really anywhere from like a 1275, 1350 would be some appropriate weight. For sure, some dairy steers get larger than that. And they can get quite large in some counties. So think about those things when you're looking at your final weight. But usually around that kind of 13 and a quarter. And again, depending on your fair, if you're a later fair, or not too late in the fair, you can get there into the show season. If you have an early fair, like the end of June, 1st of August, or July, it might be hard to get there. So it just really depends on the animal too. But a great question. So to go over the logistics a little bit, so make sure you're checking your newsletters and watching the information that comes from your county, because here soon, or pretty much all of the beef check-ins have been done. So you've gone to your county, you've gotten your animals tagged, you've gotten a beginning weight, and so you've got some information to kind of help guide you as you move forward in your project. So that's why we have that, to kind of help. And obviously performance and how animals gain is really important. Educational credits. So we want youth to learn about their project. So, that's a big part of this. And so many projects or things that you go and listen to, we want you to gain some knowledge about your project. And so some of your counties might have a requirement for some educational credits, a couple, maybe 2 classes, whatever that might be. And those are really great opportunities for you to gain more about your project. Okay. Rules of the show. Make sure you follow your premium book. Your fairs will be sharing that soon. If not, some of you have maybe rules every 2 years that you change. So make sure you've, keep track of those rules. If they change, if they're updated, that you follow the rules of the show. We obviously want that to occur. And then many of you, your fairs will have a fair auction, a county fair auction, and that's where you'll be able to auction off your animal for market price or higher. And that's a great opportunity for you to be able to financially help your project. But for many, It's a great place to have some college money, build their project, their herd, that sort of thing. I see some questions here. On a couple of these questions, I think we're just going to hang on, and I'm going to have Ron answer some of these because they are a little bit more about selection. So great questions, but hang on to those. I'm going to finish up just a few slides here. Housing, some of your guys' places are different than others. You've got lots of pens or buildings to use. Some don't have very much. So here's a couple of things to think about. Try and keep your animals in a clean, dry area. Make sure there's no things in the way. Weather conditions, protect from the extremes. And, if it's really super cold like it's been this winter, you have the ability to give them extra straw. You have some protection from the wind, that sort of thing. And especially then when it gets hot, you have some shade. You have some way for the air to move and flow so the animals are comfortable. If animals are not comfortable, they don't gain well. So those are things to think about. Health. So again, these are some things. The first bullet is how is the health of this prospect animal? Make sure before you purchase an animal that they look healthy, that they appear healthy, that their appetite is normal. So think of those things. But then when you get the animal home and you're growing your animal throughout the project, always watch your animal. It's just like watching your kids or your family members if they're getting sick. They start to get a runny nose. They might not have normal feces or normal, they might have some diarrhea. Any of those types of signs that they're not normal or healthy, very much keep a grasp on this and watch them. The last link there is the health guidelines for exhibition, and please watch these online. That's the link. And if you want to move about the state, make sure you're always following the animal of your choice in any guidelines that there might be. Okay. Safety, I'm not going to spend too much time about this because I think the other guys really did a nice job of this. But make sure in an animal, of all the animals we probably work with, beef are the more dangerous. And so certainly look at this circle here and make sure you're in areas where the animal can see you, or don't be in the areas perhaps of getting kicked. If you're right behind the animal, that's where they can't see you at all. So they might be really a bit timid if they can sense you back there, but they can't see you. These are prey animals. So what happens if they're uncomfortable? They'll either fight you or run away. So once we get our animals calmed down and halter broke, like Casey did a nice job of explaining, then you perhaps won't have to worry about this as much. But as always, these animals are animals in any new situation, such as the fair or going to a show camp or any type of thing that's different. Be mindful that they may not like it. Okay? Here are some things to think about when you're thinking about cattle. They can be flighty. They tend to kick. They don't always act the same way. Just be cautious still. Okay? Here's a nice slide that talks a little bit about the heat stress of animals. So, gosh, we better not be complaining this summer when it's 95 degrees at the fair, but I'm sure we will after this winter. We better not be. But think of these things. Make sure your animal is cool and calm, even if it's extremely hot, which we probably all want to be in some way right now. One last thing I'll end on, and I'll turn it over to Ron Russell, is record keeping. Obviously, we want you to learn from this project by setting goals for yourself and objectives for your project. What do you want to learn? What do you want to gain? What are some areas about beef that you don't know anything about and you want to learn? This is also a great way to keep track of your costs of your project. If you had to have the veterinarian come out, how much was feed, that sort of thing. And then really at the end, it's a great way to examine the goals that you had. Did you meet them? Did you exceed them? What was gained? What are you going to do next year? You're going to keep doing the beef project? Or perhaps you might say, hey, I'm gonna move on to a different one, for whatever reason that might be. Okay. After the show, the end product is just as important. Market animals become food, so we need to make sure that the animals that we produce are of good quality. Okay, and we do that by having carcass shows and ultrasound shows. So that's all part of the ending part. And each of your county fairs does this differently. Some have carcass shows, some have ultrasound shows. So that's managed in a different way. And I'm not going to go in through this too deep tonight because it is already 7 o'clock. Fun, I guess time goes by when you're having fun. So this is a great way to evaluate carcasses, and it's on how good the carcass was, and how much of it there is. And we're not going to spend too much time on that tonight, okay? But the real goal of the project is these animals are really the vehicle for our kids to develop life skills, and we want to develop Blue Ribbon Kids through the 4-H Beef Project. I think lots of us have been maybe grown up in 4-H and FFA and through animal projects, but perhaps we gained our lifelong learning in those aspects as well. Okay, I think I'm going to turn this
Your line is now unmuted.
over to Ron Russell. Ron, are you on?
I hope so.
All right, you are on. I'm going to mute my button, and you are off races. And we do have Pam yet to talk about sportsmanship.
So I don't get a 50-minute lecture?
No, you don't.
No.
This is in college time frame tonight.
By the way, back now you're going to advance the slides, right?
Yes, I will. Yep.
Okay, that's a fairly interesting slide. I hadn't seen that one. So.
Yeah, that's a great one. So Ron Russell, as way of introduction, I said briefly before you were on, Ron is our senior lecturer at UW-Madison, and he teaches all of our undergraduates livestock evaluation and meat science evaluation. And this picture right here is his son, Garish, showing a Gelbvieh heifer, so at World Beef Expo. So I thought I'd throw that in for you, Ron.
Yeah, I found it entertaining when I saw. I just happened to see that. So I'm not. Again, I apologize for getting on late. I had a class I was working with here till just a little while ago. So I'll probably be a little redundant on some of what has already been talked about. But Bernie asked me to put together a little bit of stuff as far as talking about selection. What are we trying to do is selection of our project animals. And so I kind of hit this from a kind of a general thing. I mean, first and foremost, we have to think about what are our goals. We're going to use heifers. What's the plan? There's got to be a plan for the heifer. Is it a project animal? Is it within the scope of the project? Obviously, a heifer, you're taking on more of a long-term project, where steers can be kind of confined to a certain time frame. They can be within the scope of a youth project, within a project year. Heifers are long-term. Heifers, by their very nature, are animals that we're going to start out with them, maybe at varying ages. We may want to keep them through and breed them and have them in the future for a cow-calf pair, or hopefully calve them out or do something of that nature. So I put on here, heifers. Heifers come in a variety of breeds. They come in a variety of ages. There is no one breed. There is no combination of breeds that people need to use or anything like that. There are certainly breeds that in Wisconsin and the Midwest that we're going to find more numbers and more breed classes to work with. If we go with Angus or some of the Hereford cattle, if you get into some of the other breeds, be it a Maine-Anne Jute, be it a Gelbvieh like my family messes with, be it a Limousine, be it a Simmental, there will not uncommonly be some cattle that other breeders might or other families might have there. Depending on the county that you're exhibiting in or what county you're working with, you may be the only ones that have that breed. And that's okay, too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not uncommon that, members want to have a small calf, especially if it's a small member. That can have mixed results. Sometimes you find those small calves are the ones that are the most flighty, and actually as they mature out, they kind of settle down. But that's that again, if you've got enough time to work with them, that can work out just fine. And it may not always be an option. One thing that I encounter in Wisconsin all the time is that, because we've had such an emphasis throughout time with the dairy enterprise, is that
people don't always realize, especially new project members and the like, or those that might be a little bit more separated from general production agriculture, is that beef heifers or calves are not always available as young baby calves, because beef producers leave those calves at the side of the cows until they're 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 months of age. So getting a small calf for a small exhibitor may not necessarily be available. So again, you've got to kind of think about what the plan for a heifer is when the project is complete. And depending on the age, it can be that you're going to be breeding that heifer possibly even during the project year if you're going to extend it into an ongoing market or an ongoing project. I put on here, steers are market animals, and I'm sure Bernie has already talked about this. Steers are market animals. Steers have a conclusion. The project has a conclusion inevitably, and honestly, and Bernie and I have talked about this a lot. It is a learning process. It's part of a life process. It is very instructional, and it is one of the reasons that our agriculturally based youth have a better grip on life than non-agriculturally based youth, because they understand the cycle of life. They understand that animals come, that they grow up, and they become product, and they keep moving on. So I think it's vital to know that, or to think about that if you're considering a steer. The nice thing again about steers, though, is that steers have a conclusion, so they can kind of fit nicely within the scope of a single project year, and they don't necessarily have a carryover. So on to the heifer thing. Heifers, virtually any age can be shown. They fit into different classes. They'll be shown based on their age class typically. They can be what's called a junior yearling, a summer yearling, a junior heifer calf, a senior heifer calf. All these different categories are based on what age the animals are and how they fit into those ages. If you're going to show a calf that's under 5 months of age, you might want to consider early weaning a calf, where you might have to bring a cow. But, bringing a cow, those cows that accompany calves are a lot of work, and they make a big mess at the fair. They can be easy to work with, and they're very entertaining. They're very entertaining for the general public that goes through a barn. There's nothing they like more than seeing a cow with a calf inside. But heifers can be shown, at a variety of different ages. Should you decide to go, or should in project, if you want to go purebred or some kind of a registered animal, of course, then you've got, it may impact the value of what you've got to invest in the project. Purebreds can be shown by age. Generally, as long as you've got registration papers that verify that age. What comes with that typically is when those animals are being checked in, for example, at a fair, somebody will typically verify the tattoo in the animal to verify that it matches a registration paper. I know Bernie was talking about making sure that you watch your rules and check that over. So it's always a good idea to really verify that. What breed you show absolutely does not matter. There are those that get along well showing more of our dominant breeds. There are those that get along well showing breeds that are a little bit more unique, that there are just not as many around. I know a family that shows white park cattle, and they do it very effectively. They do a nice job with their cattle. Again, you're going to find more Angus and Hereford out there if you're trying to find heifers, but if you want to get a different breed, sometimes you just have to invest the time and the energy and the research to go ahead and find them. If you find a breed that you've got an interest in, and certainly don't be afraid to ask people questions about what breeds they've had experience with and why they use that breed. I think that's always very entertaining and interesting, is to ask someone, why are you using, or how did you select that breed to show? Okay. So I put on here commercial animals, meaning essentially crossbred heifers. They can be shown by age, but more often, because there's no verification, be it registration papers or something of that nature, it's not uncommon that they can be shown by weight, depending on the program, depending on what fair that you're working with and how they work it. And breed combinations, I put the note on there that says breed combinations often exceed purebreds, to just point out that crossbred animals typically are more productive, they're more prolific, and they are typically a good combination. We blend two breeds together or three breeds together to try to get the best that they all have to offer. And so it's not uncommon that those commercial or those crossbred females are better than the straight breds or than the purebreds. So what I put on here now is so if I've got a typo, if none of the aforementioned doesn't matter, what does? Well, temperament plays a big role. Temperament is key to you having future interest in an exhibitor in continuing the project. What they want, what their nature of involvement will be. And I'll give an example. I've got a daughter that for years just simply didn't want to show cattle. She was scared of them. I don't know why, but she was just nervous around them. She didn't want to do it. We got her on a really gentle-natured steer a couple of years ago, and she went to a show with us, and she led heifers around. She didn't actually show them that year, but she kind of helped out with stuff. The last 2 years, she's picked up the halter, and she's shown steers, she's shown heifers. It just kind of brought her full circle. The key was getting her on the halter of a really, really gentle steer that would work very easily. So honestly, temperament is probably number one in particular for a new exhibitor, for a new exhibitor family. When you get into what you're going to define as quality of the animal and what that means, there's so many criteria that come into play with that. And we'll kind of go through some of that. So, Bernie, am I supposed to be looking at some of these notes at the bottom as well, or?
Sure, you can as you're going here. I've been answering some. So yeah, this last one, if you want to show that one or answer that one, it looks like weighing a steer, to prepare to keep them on track. You want to answer that one?
Well, it's a great idea if you have the, so I'm looking on there and I'm saying, okay, if you, so somebody says we show Herefords, do they usually show fairly well? Yeah, Herefords are fine. We've got a lot of really good Hereford breeders in Wisconsin that can be sources of heifers or steers. Herefords kind of are notorious for being relatively gentle as far as their temperament goes, so they can be a really nice breed to work with as far as project animals. They're certainly not the only one, but they can be really good as far as staying on track and how often to weigh a steer. There are families that weigh their steer at the beginning of the project, and then they go through a period of discovery when they show up at a fair. I don't recommend that. It's really good if you've got the ability to do so, to catch a weight, and you don't have to weigh them all the time, but it's really nice to weigh them every couple of weeks. If I had a scale available, and we don't, my family, I don't own a scale, and so I've got to take a little extra effort to get weights on steers. If I had a scale available, I'd probably try to weigh my steer I'd probably try to, work with the kids on weighing their steers every couple of weeks. And what that can tell you is, one, how on track you are for the fair, but also it kind of gives you a tip, because I know they were already talking about nutrition, but how the animals eat dictates how well they're gaining, and it can kind of keep you on track as far as, how they're doing as far as cycling on and off the feed, or if you're having some issues with that. So it's always a good idea to have a pretty good idea where your steer is going to be before you get to the fair, though, if you at all can. A friend of mine said once years ago, you feed them all out, get them as big as you want them for the fair, and if you need to hold them back, you can hold them back at the end a little easier than you can get them to accelerate. So we get back into the heifers as far as selection. If depending on your experience and what your background is, again, we've got a lot of really good breeders in this state and in surrounding states that you can go to with confidence that they will maybe provide you with a heifer that will make a very appropriate show animal, one that will work well, even-natured, even-tempered, and is a good quality animal. So I say on here, select a quiet-natured heifer that is size appropriate for her age. What I mean by that, and it's really hard, and that's where, again, depending on your experience level, you've got to depend on someone else, but it's kind of the not too tall and not too small. If they're too tall, then they're going to get too big, or they're going to be inappropriate in size in that way. They're not necessarily going to show well. And if they're really kind of small and they don't really have very good growth and performance, they don't work out very well either. And I put on there and doesn't run away again, because temperament really makes a big difference. And I put on this thing a note, select a heifer that has, and I'm going to call it average condition. What I mean by that is an animal's got some flesh, got some condition for how she's being raised. So she needs to have a smooth appearance, and that's the kind of cattle that are a little bit easier doing. They're easier to get kept on. They're easier to get on feed and keep them on feed throughout a project. And certainly select a heifer that's healthy. And again, that's where again you're going to need to look at the health program behind those cattle. And hopefully, if you're buying the animal from somebody else, that they've got a good herd health program, or that they're setting you up with a healthy one, or that they're going to be there to verify and consult with you if you do happen to run into an issue. But again, you've got to consider, where is this project leading? Are you going to chain heifers, breed them, and have a budding cow herd? And there's all kinds of herds in the state of Wisconsin and all over the Midwest that have started from a 4-H project at some point in time. So let's go to the next one, Bernie. So this is a list of different things that we'll look for in heifers when we're selecting heifers. When I say functionally sound, I mean a heifer that can kind of walk and take a nice even stride. She's got to be normal as far as all of her body parts go, and that's everything from not having anything that we call an anomaly, anything that looks like they're abnormal. They need to have a natural walk, where when they walk out, they kind of almost fill their stride, where the front foot picks up, the back foot comes relatively close to where that front foot left. We don't want any impingement of their movement. We want them to take a nice, long, even stride. And I put on here level top and level hip. You can see the picture that we've got on here, a nice level straight top right down their top, level right out through their hip to their tail head. That's all nice. We want them to be up-headed. We want an animal that, got some length and extension around their neck. We'd like for their shoulders to blend into their body. Now, if I was going to criticize the picture that we've got of the heifer on here, she is too shallow bodied. We'd like for that middle, her middle getting back toward her rear leg. We'd like for that to drop down and be a lot bigger and be a lot fuller. We would call this heifer, if we had her in a show ring, we'd say she's a little bit too shallow bodied. We just wanted to drop in that middle back toward their flank and back into the mid part of their body. We want that to drop down, get a good big full capacity to them. Those kind of cattle will feed a little easier and be a little easier to work with. And so that's why I say on their deep middle. We really want them to be wide when we look at them from the rear. Now, we don't want them abnormally wide, but we want some natural width of muscling. We want to be able to project when we look through those cattle and look around them. We want to see their midsection kind of extends a little bit from their body as they're walking away from them. We want a good, full, big middle heifer to work with. We'd like them a little bit wider and deeper from the back than we want them in the front. We certainly don't want those shoulders to be very thick and wide. We want those to be smooth and blend in from the neck right back into the rib cage. And then I've got on here toes forward and hocks back. We'd like their toes on all 4 feet to point really pretty straight forward. We don't want them to kind of what we call toe in or toe out. We like those to stay relatively straight ahead, so they're walking pretty straight and true. And we want the hocks, that area right up below their quarter, below the rear quarter. We want those hocks to come straight back at us. It's not uncommon to find cattle where the hocks kind of close, they kind of get close together. We'll call those being narrow at the hock, or they close at the ground, or whatever. We'd like for them to just keep those hocks straight back. So toes forward and hocks back as far as our heifer selection goes. Let's go to the next one, Bernie, unless you got something else. So when we get into steers, it's really not all that different than heifers. The project is going to end. The target is the timing around the fair. Depending on the breed and the type, our different weight goals come into play. We're going to want to get cattle that grow into those desirable weight ranges. I know Bernie already talked about that. Often you're dealing with trying to find spring-born calves, whether they're from your own herd or from a herd you're buying out of, that are 5 to 8 months of age, because beef producers let the cows raise calves until that point. Dairy calves can be made available at earlier times. You can get dairy calves from the time they're a couple of days old all the way through, but it's just a lot easier to select them when they get to be 5 to 8 months of age. You can kind of see what they're going to grow into and try to, again, take some of those selection criteria into account. One of the challenges we'll once in a while have on dairy calves This is not a criticism. It's just simply an observation. Depending on if you're going to use a dairy steer or use a dairy calf for a steer project, the age may or may not be something you can verify. So once in a while, we'll run into calves more often on the dairy side that they were a little older than somebody thought, and it may cause a bit of a challenge to the end. But it's just a matter of trying to keep track. The goal is to have a steer that's in the proper condition or has the right amount of fat and is the right weight at the end of the project. Obviously, we want the exhibitor to learn about feeding their project animal. We hope the exhibitor and perhaps the parents learn a little bit more about economics when they're doing this, and that can sometimes be a challenge in our youth projects. We certainly want the exhibitor to learn more about MAQ, meat animal quality assurance, and know that the animals that they're raising are going to become food. And so again, raise or select an animal from a reputable producer that can help you with production. And again, the breed absolutely does not matter. Everybody that has a breed preference is going to try to convince you that theirs is the best, and it may very well be. If it's the one that works the best for them, they might be very well capable of helping you get it to work for you as well. Breed does not matter. What matters is the focus on the project and how you can use it to raise youth. On the steer selection, I said C heifers because honestly, we look for a lot of the same things in steers we look for in heifers. Nice, level, strong, straight top. We'd like for them to be a deep middle steer. We want them to be thicker. So everything about the heifer, we just want more of it. We want them to be even thicker when we get behind them, a big, thick rump on them, a big, thick top on them, nice, deep, soggy middle to them, and we want them to be very correct. Toes forward, hocks back, straight and true in their stride, walk out with a nice, even stride. If they can keep a nice, long, clean neck, that's fine as well. That pretty much makes the steer. And depending on what you want to do with your project, again, it's always good to walk before you run. There's always a wide array of steers available. It just depends on how you want to get started and how deep into this you want to try to go.
Okay, Ron, thank you for some great information. Any questions for Ron? I think we've been answering some of them as we've been going here. I think I've kept up with everyone. Does anybody have any questions for Ron?
I like the question on there. I'll say I like the question on there. How do you get the butt of your steer bigger? In all honesty, it has to come at them genetically. People will exercise cattle. They'll take them for walks. They'll do different things of that nature. That's all good because it's a good experience to get the youth working with the animal. But taking a steer for a walk, taking them out and working with them does not enhance muscling on them. But what it does is tones that animal and gets that animal used to being worked with. To get a big butt on a steer, it's going to have to do it genetically. And outside of that, there's not a lot of ways. You can't really increase selectively some muscles at the expense of other muscles. When you're trying to grow a steer that's got desirable muscle, you've got to do it with genetics. I like this. When is a heifer too fat for show? It's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I've got a good answer for you. What I hear judges talk about at shows all the time is how a heifer that's very appropriate in the amount of condition, which is a heifer that's still somewhere between fat and trim. She's just kind of right, if you will. Sometimes when heifers start to get really kind of smooth and you'll see them start to push up some kind of fat pads and the like, either behind their shoulder or even in front of their shoulder, or if they get a big old full brisket on them, they're getting too fat. I like that, when she wobbles. Now, it's true. If she's wobbling, she's probably fat. And it's a good idea not to feed heifers to where they get too fat, because getting heifers fed to where they're too fat will compromise ultimate milk production that those heifers will generate. So that could be a bit of a problem.
All right. Any other questions for Ron? Otherwise, I think we need to move on to Pam. Pam's going to round us out here with a little bit of just, the best way to handle yourself at the show, and a little bit on sportsmanship. So we're going to round it out with that. Any other questions for Ron? All right, Ron. Oh, go ahead. Was somebody going to ask one? No. Nope. Maybe not. Okay. So thanks, Ron. You can keep on if you want to through the rest of this. You just get a few more slides left, and otherwise, or you can beg out and head home too. I know it's been a long day for you. Up at the crack of dawn to go to Green Bay this morning to get data. So he's a resilient yet accommodating colleague. I appreciate it. So moving on to Pam. Pam Hobson is our 4-H youth livestock 4-H youth development specialist in the animal sciences over in 4-H. And so her role here tonight is to talk about sportsmanship, and she also is a good contact because her background is in beef as well. So I'll leave this hand it over to Pam.
All right, thank you, Bernie. And I know it's getting towards the end, so I will go through my slides fairly quickly. The first one, it says sportsmanship. What is it? And I like to think about sportsmanship as, it's a way that you're thinking about the golden rule. Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you, think about it. If you were doing something that you're not quite sure that it's a good sportsmanship, think about it. Would you like someone to do it to you? And if the case is no, then maybe you might want to reconsider what you're doing. So if we go to the next slide. Just a couple of things, and we're not going to go through these very much and talk about them here. The next few slides have some of these on them again. Basically, it's conduct becoming to an individual, and some of the things that it involves is fairness and honest competition, being courteous with your relationships with the judge. It might be with your fellow competitors. It might be with your parents, your leaders, all those types of people. And gracefully accept the results, because I know sometimes that's hard, whether to accept it gracefully, whether you win or if you lose. So we'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. So if we could go to the next slide. The next one we're talking about, the first one is conduct. It's those high personal standards, the way you should behave. And I think we all know this, because you're not only there representing yourself, but you're representing your family, your club, your community, and that's if you're showing on the county level. But think about it this way as well. If you're going to the state fair, you're probably representing your county at the state fair, or if you're going even to a national show, you're representing the state of Wisconsin. So we want to put our best foot forward and let everybody know that where we're coming from, we have these high moral standards. Fairness, that's one of the things I think Bernie already talked about. Learn and understand the rules, and sometimes those rules change. So each year you might want to refresh yourself, and so that you know what those rules are, and then just be objective and honest. Involved in evaluating yourself and others. Be objective not only for yourself, but also think about the others that you're working with. Honesty, and I think that probably doesn't take much. Everybody knows what it means to be honest. Demonstrate that integrity. Do your own work. Be truthful, fair, and straightforward in everything you say and do. And the one thing I want to talk a little bit about here with this one is doing your own work. Now, we realize that if you're brand new to the project and you're 9 or 10 years old, you probably can't do everything, especially with your beef project, because sometimes they get a little big and stuff. But do what's appropriate. Work with your family or maybe your leaders or someone else that's a producer that will be able to help you so you can learn. And then as you grow and you learn more and you get more experience, then future years you'll be able to do more and more of your own work. Next slide, Bernie. For competition, understand that all contestants are after the same rewards, and there's going to be winners and losers. We know that's going to happen. We're all out there for the same thing, but there can only be one winner. There can only be one winner of the competition with your animal, but there can be a lot of winners when it comes to our kids and working things together. Courtesy, be nice to the other participants, and spectators. Another good one to be very nice to and courteous to is the judge, because you might be going in the showmanship class later, and that will make a difference in that class. Some of the other officials and leaders and other parents and other people that are watching, and the spectators lots of times come there. It might be grandma and grandpa, it might be your neighbor or whatever. So be courteous to all of them. And sometimes you do have questions that you need to ask, and that's sometimes the only way that we learn. So just when you ask a certain question, just be courteous. And judges at most times, I'm a judge as well, and they really enjoy it when kids come up and ask them questions afterwards, because that's one of the best ways that they learn. And a good judge will want to answer those questions for all the youth that's there. And then gracefully accept the results. We talked about before, there's only probably one that's going to win the champion animal, but accept those results and decisions with positive attitude. I always like to say as a judge, that animal was the winner for that day. Another day, another judge, something else, the outcome might have been different. But, congratulate those who do better than you do. Be happy for them. The art of being gracious is something that will do you a lot of good in the future. If you win, thank the people that helped with you. And even if you don't win, thank the people that helped you, because I know in the Beef Project, there's always a lot of people that are helping all of us. And so those are some of the things on how to be a good sport. If we look at the next slide, I found this quote from Harry Sheeny, and it says, "It is your response to winning and losing that makes you a winner or a loser." And I think that really, really says a lot when we're working with our show animals and some of those kinds of things. Being the winner in the show ring is great, and it's wonderful. I always say, if you learn some things in 4-H and some of the other things, that's the most important thing. But then if you get that blue ribbon or that purple ribbon, those are just the bonus. It's what we want to be teaching the kids that are good. And if you learn how to be a gracious loser as well as a gracious winner, you're probably going to be a winner in life. So keep that in mind. These are just the vehicle that we use to get at some of those life skills that we want to teach kids in our 4-H projects. Sportsmanship, practice it today and every day. I think about sportsmanship, and while we're talking about the Beef Project, we probably are thinking of a show ring thing, but that's something you can practice every day. And again, kind of bring it back to the beginning, think about that golden rule: do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. So that way you can practice something like that every day. So that's all I have with showmanship or sportsmanship. I don't know if there's any questions.
I haven't seen any on the chat box. Does anybody have any on the phone? Okay. If not, we just have a few slides left. I appreciate Pam for being on tonight. And again, she's a good resource on animal science, horse, poultry, any of the animal and agricultural sciences. So keep her on your speed dial. Okay, thanks, Pam. The last slides that we've got here are some resources.
Your line is now muted.
Are some resources for you and the website. We do have a beef page that you can look for some information that works for you. I think the best thing that I reference to folks is the Beef Resource Handbook from Ohio State University. It's a really nice collective handbook. It's spiral brown, and it's like, I don't know, $18 or something like that. It's a really nice resource if you really needed just a one resource. The 4-H curriculum books are also good, but this handbook really kind of gives you the information where the 4-H handbook gives you activities to do. Okay? All right. And then the last thing I'd like you to do is, some of you are in a county perspective tonight, and if you've got those evaluations filled out, that would be great. Those of you that are online from your home, in the email I sent today, you can go online, and that actually is the preferred way, because then we don't have to hand put them in on our own, an evaluation. So there's an online Google form that you can fill out on webinars. So if we have some other webinars in the previous years or other things, we know what you're looking for, what more information you might want to hear about, or ways that we can change this for future years. So please do fill out the evaluation, and that's, again, either paper copy and or online is the preferred method. Okay? And the last slide here, we do have 3 more left this year.